Rebel 2. Action! Lambda, win! The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action! Counter! Lambda, lose. Rebel 2. Action! Lambda, win! Rebel 3. Action! Please select your character. Iron Tiger. Lambda 11. The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action! Rebel 2. Action! The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
覚悟しろ。 データ取得完了。
Lambda win. Rebel 2 action.
戦士としての心得はある。
Rebel 3 action.
ダメージ吸収がこれ式甘いぞ。なかなかやるな。受けてみろ。食らえ。受けてみろ。アウトボルト。
何度でも同じ結果。
Lambda win.
模倣自走兵器
Please select your character. Lambda 11 Iron Tiger. The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1 action.
次元無限大残月戦士東海連邦システム始動自走変化次元無限
さあミスト。
予測可能次元無限大全部システムデータ取得中
Lambda win. Rebel 2 action.
更新次元無限結末は見えている
Lambda win.
模倣自走兵器運用試験の全工程を終了。フィードバックデータのインストールを開始します。
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1 action.
まだまだルーキーだな。
模倣自走兵器運用試験の全工程を終了。フィードバックデータのインストールを開始します。
Please select your character. Iron Tiger. Lambda 11. The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action. Lambda win. Rebel 2. Action.
上がるの。
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
期間正常に稼働中。
Lambda win! Rebel 2. Action! Lambda win!
魔法自走兵器運用。接続開始。
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
システム起動。次元無限化。フィールド設定。次元無限化。フィールド設定。期間正常に稼働中。
Rebel 2. Action! 結末は見えている。 Lambda win!
魔法自走兵器運用試験の全工程を終了。フィードバックデータのインストール。
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
トライ、ヒーロー、爆弾連携。公開、トライ。システム起動。トライ、無限無限大。残機。 間正常に稼働中。
Rebel 2 Action
システム終了。次元無限化。ドライ次元無限化。なぜ立ち上がるの？
Lambda Win
模倣自走兵器。
悪いが諦め
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1 Action
期間正常に稼働中。
Lambda Win Rebel 2 Action
結末は見えている。
Lambda Win
模倣自
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1 Action
公開。次元無限化。
緊急回避
データ取得中。
Lambda Rebel 2 Action
負けられまい
失敗。残
想定以上のダメージだ
システム終了。システム終了。
避けられまいジャイロ機能修復届かないかバトラ届かないか行くぞジャイロ機能修復まだまだルーキーだな
Tiger Win Rebel 3 Action
次元無限化。次元無限化。 なぜ立ち上がるの。
Lambda win! The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action! Lambda win! Rebel 2. Action! Tager wins! Rebel 3. Action! Lambda win!
模倣自称兵器運用試験の全工程を終了。
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
効果を
Let's go!
模倣自称兵器運用試験の全工程を終了。フィードバックデータのインストールを開始します。
悪いが諦め
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
期間正常に稼働。
Rebel 2. Action!
研究会員そこを超えているか
結末は見えている。
Lambda wins! Perfect! The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
見えている。
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
テーマ 中。
Lambda win! Rebel 2 action!
更新システム
さて
起動。結末は見えている。模倣図
The wheel of fate is turning! Rebel 1 action!
公開
先やります
システム起動。システム起動。フィールド発生。
さすがの情報
ストップスタート。次元無限化。フィールド発生。システム起動。
Lambda Rebel 2 action!
先やります緊急回転
Lambda win! Perfect!
模倣図書接続開始。
The wheel of fate is turning! Rebel 1 action!
以上のダメージださすがと言っておこうさすがと言っておこう避けられまい
データ取得中。
Lambda win! Rebel 2 action!
こっちの番だ避けられまい
次元無限化。なぜ立ち上がるの？
Lambda win!
装兵器運用試験の全工程を終了。フィードバックデータのインストールを開始します。
本当につらいのだな。
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
公開。
緊急会議しか避けられまい。こっちの番に避けられまい。以上のダメージだ。
機関正常に稼働中。
Rebel 2. Action!
避けられまい。
結末は見えている。戦闘データ。
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
避けられまい。
残機違う。システム始動。
こっちの番だ。届かないか。届かないか。届かないか。届かないか。暴れるな。暴れるな。バトラ
機関正常に稼働中。
Rebel 2. Action!
公開。違う。見てて。違う。次元二元化。自分の名前を。受けて。
こっちの番だ。届かないか。
なぜ立ち上がるの。
Lambda win!
模倣自走兵器運用試験の全工程を終了。
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
自
かないか。
開
さんよりも波を避けられない。
次元無限化違う以下の正常に稼働中
Lambda win! Rebel 2 action!
後半無効
暴れるな。
予測可能後半
暴れるな。アイアンフィスト受けてみろ。
自称変異ドライブ
暴れるな。
リレーボタン接続専門シーケンス
想定以上のダメージだ。
なぜ立ち上がるの
Lambda win!
模倣自称兵器運用試験の全工程を接続開始
The wheel of fate is turning! Rebel 1 action!
次元無限化
さんよりも波を
リレーボタン接続専門シーケンス後半躍動
何も避けられまい。
予測可能
何がいい。
無効専門シーケンス電気
想定以上のダメージだ。届かないか。届かないか。
以下の正常に稼働中
Lambda win! Rebel 2 action!
緊急回転。こっちの届かないか。さすがに強い。
次元無限化リレーボタン接続
何も
なぜ立ち上がるの模倣自称兵器運用試験の全工程を終了
The wheel of fate is turning! Rebel 1 action!
バトラ
は見えている。
Lambda win!
接続開始。
The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
後方スロー。
緊急回避システムオン。
次元無限化スロー。次元無限化
さすがの一発。
ダウンキル
こっち。うん。
データ取得中。
Rebel 2. Action!
後方スロー。
こっちの番だ。暴れるな。動かない。避けられまい。
なぜ立ち上がるの。
Lambda win!
模倣自走兵器運用試験の全工程を終了。フィードバックデータのインストールを開始します。
Please select your character. Lambda 11. The wheel of fate is turning. Rebel 1. Action!
普段正常に稼働中。
Lambda win! Rebel 2. Action!
シ 結末は見えている。
Lambda wins!
模倣自称兵器運用試験の全工程を終了。フィードバックデータのインストールを開始します。
Alright. Alright, hits with the overhead.
That's the overhead.
Straight for
throw.
the grab. Oh,
This
drops
is a
confirmed.
combo, but
That was a fast burst, but keeps the corner, so, well, not for long.
okay, John wanting to just push him away here.
Yep. There we go. Catches them in the air. Sickle.
Oh, there we go.
Ooh, there we go.
Some big damage and big corner carry.
Mm-hmm.
Brandon really trying to get in.
Really getting in. A lot of jumping in from Brandon. Oh, change sides first. Oh, did you get them?
Oh.
Yeah, you did. Right. Oh, good block.
Wow. Really felt like Brandon had that for a second.
A little bit, yeah, for sure.
Can't Azrael absorb those projectiles?
He can actually with the growlers, where he like kind of T-pose and starts blowing, right?
Yeah. Don't you think he should do it more in this matchup?
He definitely. At full screen, he should definitely. But I don't know if Azrael can react it better. I know for my character, it's hard to react. So you kind of have to commit, right?
Right.
And that might be the same case here. I'm not 100% sure. But absolutely, when the Lambdas are super, I know it's an easy way to throw your Growler out and absorb all those projectiles.
John's been really practicing this game.
Yep, definitely. That was very clean.
Switch to Chrome to securely store your passwords, so you can sign in with just a click.
After a succession of poorly received tie-ins in the late 90s, South Park's odyssey into video games took an extended hiatus during the 2000s. Series creators Matt Stone and Trey Parker grew protective of the license, and so began a 9-year gap between games. In their absence, video game adaptations of similar animated shows were in ample supply, with some even attaining considerable success. Taking notice of this trend, it was in late 2004 that Ubisoft attempted to reacquaint South Park with the medium. This project was led by 2 Ubisoft producers and was simply being called South Park internally. Since many of their own studios were already busy with work on other titles, the publisher opted to have a third party develop it. This was the little-known BuzzMonkey Software based in Eugene, Oregon. A slightly obscure choice, the company was apparently chosen after having presented a couple of demos for potential games to them. Ubisoft's management had declined these, but was impressed with the studio's technical ability and therefore handed them the contract to South Park before long. With Ubisoft's producers installed to oversee it, BuzzMonkey got to work in December of 2004. This was around the time that Season 8 of the show was coming to an end, with the last episode, Woodland Critter Christmas, airing on December 17th. One former developer of BuzzMonkey shared that a part of its initial mission statement was to make the first game ever to map out the entire town of South Park, almost a decade before South Park's Stick of Truth would later come along to claim this landmark. A variety of playable characters were planned to be on offer too. There was going to be the 4 boys, Stan, Kyle, Cartman and Kenny, as well as a number of secondary characters. This included Chef, Gerald Broflovsky, Randy Marsh, Mr. Slave, Towley and others. Vehicles were readily available, easily found and commandeered, not unlike the mechanics of Grand Theft Auto. The fully realised open world was only one side to it, however. What BuzzMonkey was actually attempting to bring to life was something slightly less like The Simpsons Hit and Run, and more like a traditional adventure game at its heart. The intention was for it to have a focus on puzzle solving and environmental gags that players would stumble upon as they wander about. Ubisoft had originally told the team to very directly mimic the style of Hit and Run, but they ended up putting their own spin on the formula, which they felt better captured the essence of the TV series. The PlayStation 2 was the game's lead platform, but it was also being worked on for Xbox, with a GameCube release being planned as well. The publisher gave them a fairly constrained period of time in which to put together the vertical slice shown here, although it was already starting to form into the vast, detail-rich world filled with Easter eggs and hidden jokes that they were aiming for. From what we understand, the game's story would have adopted a fairly straightforward linear mission structure, the first of which, contained within this early prototype build, put players in control of Eric Cartman, who is trying to obtain a straitjacket. To do so, he must infiltrate South Park's psychiatric hospital. During this mission, players must first gain a disguise. This alternate costume in itself would have been a throwback to an episode from South Park Season 8 called Up the Down Steroid. The episode saw Cartman entering a Special Olympics event for children with disabilities, pretending to be disabled in order to compete and win a prize of $1,000.
I want to be in the Special Olympics.
He dons a homemade outfit, including a bicycle helmet, in an ill-conceived attempt to mimic his competitors. In this level of the game, players were required to navigate Cartman's house to assemble this costume, and while they did, a licensed track, Let's Get Retarded by the Black Eyed Peas, would play in the background. When ready, Cartman would then make his way to what was referred to in-game as the South Park Mental House. Inside, the player searches for a straitjacket before a cutscene is triggered. Mistaking him for one of the actual patients, the doctors restrain him and undergo electroshock therapy on him. This, however, has unintended side effects, as it reawakens his long dormant V-chip, in yet another reference to a previous South Park story. In the movie South Park Bigger, Longer and Uncut, Cartman receives a cranial implant that electrocutes him every time he utters a profanity. As the film goes on, the chip malfunctions, granting him the ability to fire bolts of lightning from his fingertips. When the doctors force him into having this treatment, this ability inexplicably returns, allowing him to make his escape after fighting off the hospital staff.
You're going nowhere, little piggy. The door's locked, and I have the key.
It's at this point that we are introduced to the game's combat system, a fairly basic repertoire of punches and kicks, as well as a ground pound move for Cartman. This is just one example of missions that were on the table, representing some of the humour and blends of different gameplay types like driving, fighting, and collectible hunting that were to be expected in the finished game. The story cinematics were said to be pre-rendered CGI, made in-house at BuzzMonkey. The voice acting used for them, a developer explained, was not in fact provided by showrunners Matt and Trey themselves, although other members of the show's official cast had apparently filled in for them. It's possible that the duo's involvement might have increased if the project had continued, but their interaction with the game was next to non-existent. A former designer believed that they were distantly made aware of its development, although they had no input on any creative level. Outside of the single-player component, BuzzMonkey was also hoping to develop a robust split-screen multiplayer suite. Some of their ideas included modes for racing, as well as the tentatively dubbed Snowball Wars, Cops and Robbers, and Mailbox Baseball. These were simply rough concepts, however, as the focal point of development was very much fixed on that solo experience. South Park was the company's most ambitious title by quite a margin. For a game of its time, the overworld, for instance, was shaping up to be relatively huge. It was worked on for a total of 10 months, before, in a somewhat sudden twist, it was cancelled. At the time, a large amount of progress had been made towards crafting the town and trying to make it as true to the show as possible. The Xbox build you see here, obtained by Andrew Bowman of Past to Present Online, is only an early glimpse of what was finished, dating back to March 2005. The project came to a close in August. Former employees of the developer provided some insight into the circumstances around its abrupt collapse. One ex-artist believed that the root cause of its termination was the actions of one individual in particular, one of the game's two producers. Multiple developers formerly of BuzzMonkey claim that this Ubisoft staffer, who had never previously held a producer position, exhibited strange and unprofessional behaviour for the duration of the project. Some describe this person as being rude and temperamental towards members of the team, with one or two of them suggesting this might have been the reason why Ubisoft stepped in and shut it down. This theory is supported by the fact that this individual was fired from the publisher within the subsequent months. Another source, a designer who had a major role in the game's development, believes this issue was only the tip of the iceberg. Ubisoft's schedule for the title had been tight to say the least, pushing the team to its limits. This, coupled with the enormous amount of work still left to be done, made for a difficult situation. For many of the developers on board, this was their first project, so lack of experience, let alone with AAA titles, was another obstacle to factor in. All of these problems, in addition to how late it was being made in the generation, ultimately rendered it unfeasible in the eyes of Ubisoft. By the end, it had never officially left pre-production. BuzzMonkey's South Park prototype ran on an engine of their own creation, which was intended to be utilised by multiple original projects in the future. In the aftermath of its cancellation, the developers attempted to form other, smaller games using it. Among these was a platformer named Cave Girl and a tech demo for a game based around the 2006 movie Happy Feet. When none of these were picked up by publishers, BuzzMonkey took a new direction to sustain itself, working on ports for a handful of well-known franchises, including Tomb Raider. In March 2011, an Assembler Games user named Proton X revealed to the world Sonic X-treme, an unreleased Sonic the Hedgehog spin-off. This highly rare prototype, which was salvaged from a development kit for the original Xbox, raised many questions, a good number of which were answered by those who continued to research it in the years that followed. Andrew Bowman, a seasoned video game preservationist, rediscovered it after it had fallen off the map for around 5 years. He was able to successfully track down the only build of it known to exist and dig into its contents to unearth more details. According to Andrew, the prototype was made by a little-known company called Visionscape Interactive from San Diego, California. Over 13 years since the project's inception, I reached out to former members of Visionscape to get their side of the story behind this mysterious lost game.
Together, we are Valorant.
미안해서 어쩌나?
Kültürümüzü kucaklıyoruz.
Ipinaparinig namin ang aming boses.
Are you ready for it?
Visionscape's road to creating Sonic X-treme can be traced back to around 2002. They had just completed development on Seablade, a flight combat shooter game for the Xbox. It had originally been intended to be part of a collaboration with Microsoft to promote the 2001 Steven Spielberg film AI Artificial Intelligence. The agreement ultimately fell apart, and Visionscape was forced to hastily retrofit the title into an original IP, stripping out all references to the movie just months before release. This turn of events limited its success. For Visionscape, though, this was only one of the few ventures they had in the works. They had also secured the video game rights to Tech Deck, a series of finger skateboarding toys that gained popularity in the late 1990s. The outcome of this deal was a line of products known as digital playsets. These were packages sold at toy stores around the world, each containing 2 Tech Deck character figurines and a CD-ROM with a video game on it. Known as Bare Knuckle Grind, the skateboarding game was developed by Visionscape Interactive and utilized an innovative innovative business model. Each of the different tech deck character figure packs came with their own version of the game that contained new playable characters and a different town to explore. The more players collected of the toy line, the larger their interconnected virtual world or digital playset would become. The model in many ways foreshadowed the arrival of Toys to Life games like Disney Infinity and LEGO Dimensions. Launching in 2003, the product soon became a success. Ahead of its launch, however, Visionscape was already acting on plans to expand Bare Knuckle Grind's reach with ports to consoles. They also intended to reuse the framework they had built for it in other skateboarding themed games. The first of these was based around the Nickelodeon TV show Rocket Power, a cartoon series about a group of friends who partake in various extreme sports. Publisher THQ acquired the license around the time of its first airing in 1999 and had set about producing video game tie-ins with it. The next one they had planned was called Rocket Power Zero Gravity Zone. It was set to be developed by Visionscape for Xbox, PS2 and GameCube, while Ultron, a separate company, handled a Game Boy Advance version. Visionscape's console game used a lot of the tech they had built for Bare Knuckle Grind and the same engine, a version of Renderware. It was being made with the Xbox as the lead platform, given the fact that they already had experience with the hardware from working with Microsoft on Seablade. Renderware would have enabled them to port Rocket Power Zero Gravity Zone to other platforms with relative ease as development went on. Unfortunately for them, however, the project never made it that far. Right before the game was set to enter alpha testing, THQ, who had been funding it, abruptly applied the brakes in around late February 2003. For years, its cancellation would remain shrouded in mystery. I contacted Matt McDonald, one of Visionscape's co-founders, to understand more about what happened and its connection to Sonic X-treme. According to Matt, THQ faced mounting financial issues at the time. Within the space of a week, 13 separate projects were cancelled in an effort to decrease spending, including Visionscape's Rocket Power title. Ultron's Game Boy Advance version, on the other hand, had a much smaller budget and was thus allowed to continue. It released in August 2003 without its home console counterparts. With their Rocket Power game dead, a lot of Visionscape's employees were left without an active project. Their president, Matt McDonald, was forced to improvise. A number of Visionscape's members had a background in animation. Matt had himself worked on the animated TV show But Ugly Martians, for instance. The studio therefore not only made its own games, it was producing CGI animation for games made by other companies. They had been hired to do 3D animated cutscenes for Sega's next Sonic the Hedgehog title, Sonic Heroes. Making use of this new industry contact, Matt decided in May 2003 that his team would put together a pitch for a new Sonic game for Xbox, PS2 and GameCube. The idea was to take the technology and experience they developed during Rocket Power and Bare Knuckle Grind and apply it to this new project. It was planned to be a game where the player competed against various Sonic characters in a number of differently themed worlds on hoverboards. Using the same engine and many of the same assets from Bare Knuckle Grind, a playable prototype was assembled for this theoretical new game. Recycling pre-existing tools like this allowed them to create the demo very quickly. Matt estimates that it took them no more than a week to make. Not only was the development process efficient, if the pitch was successful, it would carry the advantage of giving Sega a head start on the following Sonic game, since Sonic Team itself wouldn't be done with Heroes until later into the year. Thanks to their collaboration with Sega on the cinematics for Sonic Heroes, it meant that they also had some access to their internal library of game assets, like character models for both Sonic and Shadow, as well as art from previous games. These would become implemented into their hoverboarding prototype. Its menus were comprised of promotional art from the Sonic Adventure games, and the character models became their two playable characters, Shadow and Sonic. The player could navigate them through a skate park level stylized after Green Hill Zone from the original Sonic the Hedgehog with its iconic checkered soil. The stage is full of various slopes to ride up and rails to grind on. Doing so will allow you to pull off a number of tricks like stalls, flips and spins. Executing a trick successfully will give you points that are tallied up into a total shown on the top left of the HUD. According to Andrew Borman, the prototype's owner, there are a few different modes that are accessible within it. The first of these is a single player mission mode where the player explores the Green Hill style environment with the ultimate goal of collecting an emerald. They must first locate and collect a key, which then allows them to unlock a portal. Travelling through it will take them to a final area wherein they can pick up the floating emerald, at which point the demo ends. The other two main modes have a two-player local multiplayer option enabled via split screen. Alternatively, they can be played against a computer-controlled opponent. One of them is dubbed Combat and has the two hedgehogs duking it out by picking up weapons and firing them at each other. There are several different types of weapons to grab, including rockets and grenades. They can also perform a spin attack to smash crates, revealing more of the level. The other game type is a simple race mode where the two characters compete against each other in a race to the finish. There are Sonic-style boost pads on the ground, enabling you to pick up more speed. In addition, there is a very basic grey coloured area built by the developers for test test purposes that's hidden in the game's files. Various audio files sourced from Sonic Adventure 2 are used throughout the demo, including voice clips for Sonic and music lifted from its soundtrack. Playing as Sonic will trigger Escape from the City, the theme from Sonic Adventure 2's City Escape level to play. Shadow's music, on the other hand, is the song from the Knuckles Pumpkin Hill stage, A Ghost Pumpkin Soup. Lastly, the menu music is the Chao Garden's Chao Machine track. Sonic Extreme's prototype was paid for by Visionscape itself, initially existing without Sega's knowledge. It wasn't until Visionscape called a meeting with Sega that their project would become formally introduced to them. Matt McDonald sat down with the head of Sonic team at the time, Yuji Naka, to show him their work. According to Matt, Naka was hugely impressed with the demo. He apparently made it clear that while Sega had no such game like this being planned, he was enthusiastic about the concept. At the end of their meeting, he allegedly stated in no uncertain terms that the two companies would move forward with the project. He requested that Visionscape assemble a design document planning out a full game and a preliminary budget calculating how much it would cost Sega to develop. For the brief period that would follow, it seemed to Visionscape's management that they had secured the company's immediate future with this new deal on the horizon, although this sense of security was short-lived. Visionscape did draft up and submit the plans requested by Yuji Naka, but it was at this juncture that Sega went silent on the matter. McDonald and his team waited for weeks expecting a response. There wasn't one. Repeated attempts to contact Sega were made by Visionscape's agent in the following months to no avail. Without any explanation provided, the publisher ended its correspondence with them on a permanent basis after they submitted the cutscenes for Sonic Heroes. Speaking to me in 2017, Matt McDonald says that he never took their quiet rejection of Visionscape personally. He assumed that they simply had other plans and chose against moving forward with Sonic Extreme. It was another 2 years before Matt and his team would receive an update on the Sonic Extreme front. In this time, Sega had released Sonic Heroes and was nearing completion on its spin-off, Shadow the Hedgehog. In September 2005, the heads of Visionscape were surprised to learn about the next Sonic game in development, Sonic Riders. The title was set to feature Sonic and his friends racing on hoverboards and performing tricks across various worlds, a premise that they believed was strikingly similar to the one Visionscape had pitched around 2 years earlier. In our correspondence, Matt told me that he is certain that Sega essentially took the rough concept that they presented in Sonic Extreme and made it themselves, excluding Visionscape from the process altogether. This, he believes, accounts for their total silence after their full proposal was submitted. Comparing Sonic Riders and the Extreme prototype, there are some vague similarities outside of the core hoverboarding concept. It could be argued that the modes in Visionscape's pitch are in some form precedent riders. There is a battle mode in which players hover around a small arena and fight each other. They can even collect items that float next to them. They both, of course, have race options, and there is a game type in Riders where you collect an emerald, although it's very different from the one seen in Extreme and has more of a competitive slant to it. Despite these small observations, there's ultimately little value in comparing a rough prototype made in about a week from pre-existing assets to a fully funded finished game. There's no way of knowing how a fully developed Sonic Extreme would compare to Riders. What McDonald alleges is that Yuji Naka and his team took Visionscape's early concept of a Sonic hoverboarding game and went in their own direction from there. When Matt first learned about Sonic Riders, he did contact his agent to inquire about the legal situation around its alleged connection to Sonic Extreme. He was apparently told that the non-disclosure agreement Visionscape had signed during Sonic Heroes included a caveat that if any pitch submitted to Sega used their intellectual property, in this case Sonic, Visionscape would automatically surrender ownership of it. In other words, Sega is the legal owner of Sonic Extreme, and if Sonic Team did copy its ideas for Sonic Riders, it would have been completely legal. Matt's allegations are supported by other former members of Visionscape that I spoke to independently of him who are no longer under his employment. Furthermore, the file dates from the prototype prove definitively that it was made before Sonic Riders, as he claims. In the interests of balance, I did contact both Yuji Naka and Sega multiple times to hear their side of the story, but both declined to comment. Sonic Extreme marks one of the many games lost in the Blue Hedgehog's long history. It's also one that we might never have discovered were it not for the actions of a few rogue ex-employees from Visionscape. The company had announced it was shutting down in 2006, at which point Matt instructed a few of his remaining staff to dispose of their old development hardware. He had arranged for them to deliver a series of dev kits to an electronic recycling plant. Evidently, at least some of this technology never made it there. Instead, it appears to have been sold about, being traded between private collectors before eventually being recovered and preserved by Andrew Ballman. Officially, nothing ever came of Visionscape's Sonic hoverboarding project, but depending on who you believe, it could be possible that there is a causal link between the existence of it and an entire series of Sonic spin-off games. The Star Wars Rogue Squadron games released originally on Nintendo 64 and GameCube respectively between the years of 1998 and 2003. It was a flight combat series made in a collaboration between Factor 5 and LucasArts that was met with praise from critics and relative success. In the years that followed its last installment, Rebel Strike, rumours of a follow-up continue to occasionally crop up. There were stories of an apparent sequel and a possible remastered collection, but none of these amounted to anything. It wasn't until October 2014 that the former president of Factor 5, Julian Egbrecht, appeared on IGN's Nintendo podcast to shed some light on what happened. He revealed a scrapped multiplayer version of Star Wars Rogue Squadron and an unreleased compilation of the games with new features. The true extent of the developers' involvement with Star Wars and their relationship with LucasArts, however, was far from fully divulged. In looking back through the rich history of these two companies, we will learn more about the missing trilogy collection and discover two more lost Star Wars games that have never previously been spoken of publicly. In around October 2003, Star Wars Rogue Squadron 3 Rebel Strike was finished and launched in all territories by the end of November. During that game's development, Factor 5 had begun to take on other projects on the side, such as proposals for Nintendo. This included a gritty take on Pilot Wings for the GameCube, which was set during the early Cold War era. This was a time in the company's history when they were relentless in coming up with new ideas as they were trying to decide what was next. At some point during the making of Rogue Squadron 2, they had done something they'd never previously done with Star Wars. After a few years of making games where you played as members of the Rebel Alliance like Luke Skywalker, their creative heads decided to do things a bit differently. Hidden inside the game were two non-canonical bonus missions named Triumph of the Empire and Revenge on Yavin respectively. They imagined an alternative timeline to Star Wars in which the Rebel Alliance is crushed by the Galactic Empire. It was a short what-if story which asked, what if the Rebels failed to destroy the first Death Star in the climax of A New Hope? The player controlled Darth Vader, piloting his distinctive TIE Advance X-1, who must put a stop to the Rebel assault on the Death Star. If successful, Luke Skywalker is killed moments before completing his attack, and the Empire emerges triumphant. In the following mission, Vader and his squadron invade Yavin 4. They must eliminate all of their fleeing transport vessels to prevent the Rebel leaders from escaping. A couple of years on from Rogue Squadron 2, Factor 5's people decided they would revisit this concept after Rebel Strike. They would take the idea much further in a spin-off of the Rogue Squadron series dubbed Star Wars Dark Squadron. As the name suggests, this was planned to be an entire game where the player fought for the Imperials, joining their campaign to quash the Rebel Alliance. Like Rogue Squadron, it would have been a flight combat game, but with a spotlight on Imperial ships like TIEs as you would expect. The main playable character would have been Darth Vader, as it was in the aforementioned Empire levels from Rogue Squadron 2. The previous games offered players some limited strategy elements, such as the ability to issue orders to your squad mates with the D-pad.
Engage at will.
Dark Squadron would have expanded upon this, allowing you to command an entire Imperial fleet. You would have been able to bring up a menu during missions to purchase new support options. This entailed everything from tactical moves like orbital strikes and blockades to summoning new Star Destroyers, bombers, and walkers for ground assaults. A former programmer of Factor 5 suggested the game would have seen a number of enhancements over Rebel Strike, saying that it was to have a renewed focus on vehicle missions. Rebel Strike was the first edition of the Rogue Squadron series to feature on-foot sections with shooting gameplay inspired by the classic arcade game Robotron 2084. By the company's own admission, these segments hadn't turned out quite as well as they had hoped, drawing criticism from critics and fans alike. Had it been made, this new project would have done away with those sections completely. Dark Squadron was in essence a pitch that was floating around for a possible game. There was no gameplay prototype ever made, just one or two pieces of concept art, early animatics, and documentation showcasing some some of the team's ideas. It was conceived after the end of development on Rebel Strike, and like that game, they wanted it to be a GameCube exclusive. The material for Dark Squadron was coming together towards the end of 2003, as LucasArts was preparing to deliberate over their budget for the following year. This was the time when the publisher would review pitches from their partners and decide which games would be receiving funding. LucasArts, of course, wasn't just a publisher, it had its own in-house development team that was making its own original projects, like various tie-ins to the Star Wars prequel movies. They were also contributing towards various productions being handled externally, including the Rogue Squadron games. Around the time that Dark Squadron was being realised, they too were trying to get a new project funded. Despite the LucasArts development team being part of the larger company, they weren't supposed to have any kind of advantage over third-party companies like Factor 5 when it came to the pitching process. They were still required to pass all of the same hurdles as anyone else trying to get a game funded. They had to present it to a LucasArts publishing committee comprised of their higher-ups. The LucasArts team had come up with the concept of doing an action-adventure game with popular Star Wars character Chewbacca as the lead character. It would have explored that space of Chewie's life when he went from being a warrior on Kashyyyk to being Han Solo's right-hand man. Their ideas revolved around his adventures working as a bounty hunter between the years of episodes 3 and 4. This Chewbacca bounty hunter game was set to compete directly with Dark Squadron for funding. Due to the constraints of the yearly budget, it was unlikely that both would be picked up. If one was approved, the other would have to be shelved. Unfortunately for Factor 5, it was the Chewbacca project that would emerge the victor, while Star Wars Dark Squadron was rejected. Reportedly, there was some trepidation around proprietary issues, as well as how well Factor 5 would be able to implement some of their ideas, and how the player would perceive them in the game. Although, some former associates of the two companies blamed the outcome at least partially on politics inside LucasArts. The creative head of the Chewbacca game was Hayden Blackman, who was the project lead on the MMO Star Wars Galaxies. It's claimed by some that Blackman may have used his influence inside the company to sway the Greenlighting Committee and help push Dark Squadron aside to further his project. Factor 5 meanwhile was quick to recover from their loss, having a new proposal lined up, and this time with the full backing of LucasArts. They now sought to produce a remastered compilation of the Rogue Squadron games with new features and some major improvements. During the development of Rebel Strike, Factor 5 had come under increasing pressure from LucasArts to abandon their pact of exclusivity with Nintendo. Rogue Squadron 2 and 3 were both GameCube exclusives, despite the console struggling to sell nearly as well as Nintendo had hoped. While Rogue Leader performed well at the launch of the system, its sequel wasn't anywhere near as successful. LucasArts wanted Factor 5 to start developing for a console with a larger share of the market that was powerful enough to run their games, the Xbox. After some reluctance, Factor 5 finally agreed in late 2003 that they would begin developing for the Xbox, starting with the Rogue Squadron collection. This would appease LucasArts from a business perspective, but to Factor 5 it also meant they could embrace the new opportunities which came with the platform. It allowed them to explore a frontier they had been unable to on GameCube, which was online play. All of the versus modes that were previously only available through local split screen were now to be redone to support play over Xbox Live. Work on the Xbox conversion of Rogue Squadron progressed without incident until April 2004, when the foundations of LucasArts were rocked by management shifts. The company's board appointed their vice president of marketing, Jim Ward, as their new president. Ward had inherited the duty of turning the declining publisher around. At the time, they were in such bad financial shape that employee bonuses for 2004 had to be dropped completely. Their new president wasted little time in asserting himself. Within the first months under Ward's leadership, LucasArts cut numerous projects benefiting from their funding, and before long, the Rogue Squadron trilogy found itself in the firing line. Despite the fact that it was around halfway done and was on schedule for a late 2004 release, the project was canned in an unexpected turn for the developers. Most of the work done was on porting the offline missions into one merged interface. The online components were never up and running. In a twist of irony, the Chewbacca game, which in